Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure and honor to have a fellow podcaster, someone who really believes in the importance of studying the scriptures and daily devotional Bible reading, sticking with it every day. She has made it a podcast. I mean, she has devoted herself to doing the entire Bible in her podcast. So I have to tell you, I'm so looking forward to this conversation. So, Jenn Kokal, welcome to the God and Gig Show. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing awesome as we've been just laughing because I
Awesome.
mean,
Yes.
even as I'm going to take these glasses off because I don't know if you're watching here, but I have this funny glare because I've changed my office around. You are in snowy, where I know it's the Midwest, but tell me where you are.
So I'm near Cleveland, Ohio, and we just got, what was it? I think where I live was about 26 inches of snow overnight.
Whoa, wait a minute. Okay, I don't, I think I could do math. So that's over 2 feet, right?
Yes.
Am I right?
Yeah, it was up to
That's,
my thighs.
oh
Yeah.
my gosh. Okay, so
Yeah.
the first question, I guess, is being up north, dealing with the winters and stuff like that, what is, the thing that keeps you going when it comes to having to like snow days and getting out, or whether it's going to church or work or with the kids, like, how do you handle that? Like, I'm a Southerner my entire life. I was born in Philadelphia, but grew up around Pensacola, Florida, which is the Panhandle. So, the
Hmm.
cold, we break out our fur coats at 60, just to tell you that. So how are you handling that day to day with like 26 inches of snow?
Yeah, well, it's not that bad. I mean, I know some people would completely disagree with me that live up here. Driving in it is not so fun, but honestly, if you just have some good boots, you're good to go.
Got it. Well, I know
Yeah.
half the country is like thinking like, yeah, we got this, and the other half that's down with me is thinking like, no, we'll leave that for you guys. Well, thank you so much once again for being on the show. You were,
Hmm.
it was an honor that you invited me to be on your show earlier, I think the end of 2021. And tell us first a little bit about what you do, who you are, and just why you are creating what you're creating for both believers and other people who want to know about the Bible.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Jen, as Alan had just said. And well, I guess a backstory of me is I've always been a creative, and I was a hairdresser for years. So I was a hairdresser, I think, for 8 years, but I hated it. I I did not enjoy it at all. There was just, I just knew it wasn't my passion. I knew it wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I don't know if any of your listeners have heard my podcast before or not, but I talk often about how I was a very different person back in those days. I
Hmm.
was very, very different. I was how do I put this? I was just not a very healthy person in general. So I wasn't healthy physically, I wasn't healthy mentally, spiritually, basically in any way. I was just not a healthy individual. And I was, I guess, a quasi Christian. I believed in God, I believed in Christianity, believed in Jesus, but I went to church to check off a box. That was all it was for me. There was no like deep faith involved with any of my spirituality, nothing. And so 2018 rolled around and I got fired from my job because I was late too often.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
I love how this is all already going to, okay, the
Uh-huh.
organization and paying attention
Yep.
to the time. Okay, so you faced
Yes.
that. How old were you at, by the way? May I ask, or around what age were you at this time when you said you were a
So
quasi Christian? I'm just wondering, was this, were you a teenager, young adult?
basically up until 2019. So that would have been, what is that? 3 years ago now.
Wow,
So yeah, so up until time I was about 25
got
ish.
it. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, after I got fired from my job, it was kind of a wake up call a little bit. Sort of. I didn't want to see it as a wake up call.
Mhm. Yeah,
I
yeah,
didn't want to
but
see that there was an issue. Yeah. But there was definitely an issue. And so what happened after that was I was like, you know what? I hate hairdressing anyway. I got fired from my job. I'm just going to do something completely different with my life. I'm going to go in a different direction. So that's what I decided. So I went back to school, and my husband is an engineer. And fun fact, he is literally the opposite personality of myself.
Okay.
But because he did engineering, I'm like, you know what? I will be good at engineering too. We can work together. This will be great. So, despite everybody telling me, Jen, don't go into engineering, that is just not for you, I was like, no, you guys don't get it. You don't understand. This is what I want to do. And it was a really snap decision for me. And that's an issue I have, is just deciding to do something and then not thinking it through and just doing it. I struggle with that. And so I jumped fully in. I applied for college and for community college, I should say, and started going to these classes. And I had no way to pay for them because because I had no job. So I already had put down a down payment, and my husband was gracious enough to pay it for me. And he's like, you know what, Jen, I'll just pay it for you if this is what you want to do. And he's like, but you got to find a job, obviously, if you're going to keep going. And I'm like, yeah. So I found a job, and it was at a job fair at my college at the time, and it was the only job even remotely related to engineering. Okay. And it was basically a factory position, but they had promised they'll train me, they'll help me do whatever. And so I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to start this. So I believe it was November 26th, 2018, when that was my first day at this job. And I hated it.
Oh,
I hated it so much. I got stuck there for like a solid, I believe it was a solid year and 2 months. I was counting the days.
oh, geez.
And the reason I got stuck there was because, firstly, I couldn't find another job. I had no degree. And secondly, I had to pay for the college that I was already doing. So it was kind of like this weird loop of I was just stuck where I was. I was stuck in the college classes, which I also hated, and I was stuck at this job. So very, very early on, learned that engineering was not for me, but I was stuck. There was nothing else I could do. And also I was a little bit too prideful to admit it. So I
Uh,
just kept paying for the college classes. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to keep going,
was it called sunken cost when you put too much into it to throw it away, but you kind of know it's a losing proposition.
Yes, yes. So that's kind of what happened. And, during that time period, though, as much as I hated it, and one thing I've learned is that and I think many creatives can also sympathize with this, is I'm not a very structured person.
And yet you chose engineering as a possibility. So that's
Yes.
interesting.
Yeah.
But I feel like when even as you're saying it, I kind of think of the long and winding road that a lot of us take to what we think is, mine started with creativity in terms of, music, which was always part of it, but then it was
Mm-hmm.
teaching, and you just mentioned the structural piece. Well, teaching was not my structure because even though I'll always be a teacher at heart, the public school system demands kind of what you said about being late, and you can't be
Mm-hmm.
late when kids are waiting for you, and you got to have lesson plans ready. You can't just be like, you know what I want to learn today,
Yeah.
let's do jazz, just out of
Yeah.
the blue. Like there had to be organization to my strategy and teaching. So when all of this was coming at you, like you're talking about, like really trying to find what sounds like, and hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, it looks like you were trying to find yourself a little bit. So where did
Mm-hmm.
that take you? Where did that, people say, call it the journey, right? So at what
Mm-hmm.
point did the journey take you to, wait, something really has to change, both in terms of your faith and in terms of like knowing what you really wanted to do?
Oh, um, let me think about that question. So are you asking like when it changed?
Yeah, like what was it? Was it a thing that happened? Was it an event? Was it a moment, a person? Somebody comes in. You know how God sometimes uses somebody. They'll kind of slap
Mm-hmm.
you upside the, not actually, but if you feel like, oh, there's like a turning point, right? That turning point, that Damascus Road moment was like something clicks or something kind of turns it around. So I'm just wondering what that was.
It was just a series of little events
Hmm.
more than anything. It was kind of that entire year just piled on.
Got it. Got it.
There was so many things. I mean, I could go into the reasons I hated that job. It was not just the structure aspect of it. There was a lot of weird stuff happening as well. For example, I got harassed by a handful of different men, which I'm not going to go into that too much, but it was just, it was not a good situation for me. And I think what happened at the beginning of it, when I started realizing this is not the place I should be,
Yeah.
I was playing the blame game. I was blaming my husband because he was an engineer and he said, yeah, go for it and whatever. I was blaming probably my family. I was definitely blaming God. I was like, God, why would you ever put me here? I've been a Christian my whole life. I'm also a musician. I've played at the church for 10 years or whatever it was. And I'm like, why would God do this to me? And so so it was a blame game.
Yeah.
And it took me a really long time. I was going through a lot of anger, frustration in 2019. And finally, you know what? I do kind of remember a small turning point that sort of got me to where I am today. I believe it was August or September of 2019. So yes, I was angry for that long.
Wow.
Um, that a lady at my church asked me, she's like, Jen, would you like to co-lead this Bible study with me? And I was like, well, I don't really know how to do that. I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. And she's like, no, you can just co-lead it. Just watch how I do it. And maybe you can do like one lesson, just co-lead it with me. And I'm like, all right, I'll give it a try. And it was kind of funny that I said yes, because I was never a person to say yes to stuff I didn't want to do.
Mm.
Typically, I was always like, no, 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 no. And people at the church wouldn't ask me to do stuff because I was always saying no. And in fact, I learned this recently. This is how different I was back then. One of the ladies that goes to my church is a good friend of mine and she said to me recently, she's like, Jen, I remember used to trying to talk to you and you would just give me like quick answers and just walk right out the door. And I'm like, wow. And that was like kind of I don't know, like that was really revealing to
Yeah. I
me.
mean, it sounds like it's got to be kind of tough to hear, but it sounds like almost like you didn't rebel against that assessment. It sounds like maybe you didn't realize it at the time, but I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of times as we are trying to figure things out about ourselves, we do become like, the center of our universe, not
Mm-hmm.
realizing that everybody else is kind of like, okay, can you kind of come outside of your orbit a little bit and just kind of pay attention to us and see what other people are having struggles? And because we're all going through it, but we all become kind of like this, iconoclastic person in the middle of the ring, and we think that like nobody else is going through what we're going through. In the
Mm-hmm.
meantime, there's plenty of people, obviously, we're all kind of like trying to sort this out. And you mentioned even in church, you can almost feel
Mm-hmm.
alone in the middle of when people are doing so many things. They're worshiping or they're serving or they're doing that. And, Christians, especially those of us, again, that we get in this church environment and we feel like everything should be solved simply by being in the environment versus God kind of saying, hey, no, I'm going to have to show you and you're going to have to make some effort to find your place because you have a place, but you can't just, it's not going to be like just handed to you on a silver
Right.
platter. And so it looks like this woman was willing to give you a chance to lead this Bible
Mm-hmm.
study because she wanted you to kind of, hey, why don't you step out a little bit of what you think is right and then into
Right.
what might be a new path for you? Is that what happened?
Yeah. And, yes, I would agree with that. She did give me this chance. And the more amazing thing about this was the study we ended up doing,
Hmm.
which was a Jenny Allen study called Stuck. And
Sounds
everything
like she
about this
had a
study,
little bit of ulterior motive in putting you in this program.
it was funny though, because no one knew about what I was going through at this time. I was super closed off.
Okay, then God, and then
Hmm.
clearly it was, and then we know who it was then.
Yes, it was definitely a God thing because um, one thing I believe this was the start of the turning point for me was one thing that stuck out to me in that Bible study was this chapter called, I think it was Places, and it was talking about like the places you're at, and God is putting you through those places for a reason, and basically, who are you to like defy God's will with where you're at in those places? And it was funny because that just stuck out to me so much because of what I was going through. In fact, the entire study was for me, I believe. I mean, that sounds a little egocentrical, but everything about that study was talking to me, if that makes sense. And
Absolutely.
so, yeah. And so, I guess I kind of gave God like an ultimatum after that. Yeah, my faith still wasn't very good. I'm gonna be honest.
No, but I think he's cool with that. I think at that level, when you're at that level of faith, it's like okay, put up or shut up. I think God is. I've never thought God is like taken aback by anything we ask, right? So
Mm-hmm.
yes, I'm pretty sure he knew that was coming.
Yeah, I think he did, but and if I'm being honest, I don't remember what the ultimatum was. I remember doing one, but I kind of just felt God saying to me like, "Shut up and just do what you're doing." I truly felt that that's what he was saying,
Hmm.
because that's sort of what I needed to hear was like, quit complaining, quit nagging. There's a reason you're here, and just do it. So I kind of just did it, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna stay here until I am moved. And so my faith started growing at that point. I actually ended up downloading a dramatized version of the Bible because I used to be able to listen to audiobooks at my job because it was just constant factory work. And so I listened to this entire Bible, dramatized Bible, in a month. And it changed my entire life because I'd always read the Bible in like little bits and chunks, but I had never looked at it as like a full book that has a story from beginning to end. And so when that happened, I was like, wow. Like I always believed God in the Old Testament was so cruel, was so mean, just struck people dead all the time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's like a horror movie sometimes if you just look at
yeah.
it out of context and just the actual individual actions and wars and like yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I can definitely see that again as you mentioned that you were kind of so this dramatized Bible kind of asked like what was it about it that kind of that made you feel like this was a whole new perspective? Was it because it was dramatized? Was it because of the way they were? Was it like a King James, like kind of dramatized? Was it a message? Like what was it about the way they presented it that made this more approachable for you?
I just, like I said, I'm the type of person that once I do something, I go all in.
Got it.
And so when I saw the dramatized version, I was like, okay, maybe this is something I can listen to. It was also probably a little bit superstitious. In fact, I know it was that maybe if I read this whole Bible, God will like get me out of here or something.
Well, hey,
I
you you
kind of
you
believe that.
you operated on the faith that you had. It's like, hey, if I move forward, I mean, that's one great way to do it by reading the Bible by saying, okay, God, I'm going to get all of your word in, and
Yeah.
I'm going to find
Yeah.
out if this really works for me.
Yeah. And so it was an NKJV version of it. And yeah,
Got
they
it.
did a good job on the dramatization aspect, which brought like music and different uh people acting out the Bible. So it was cool. It was a really interesting take and perspective on the Bible. And it was all read, like read the word of God. And so yeah, but it changed my outlook. Maybe I don't know if it was so much the dramatization or just reading the Bible in that quick of a period as like a book.
Right.
And so when that happened, my faith started to change because I had a new perspective of who God was. Like he's not this angry, mean God that I believed he was before. He's loving, he's generous, he's giving. I mean, the book of Judges, people like to avoid that book because because of all the death and violence and whatever else in it. But man, it is just God showing his mercy time and time and time again for his people over and over again. And his people are constantly just drifting away. And here God comes in to the rescue. And there's one verse in particular in Judges that just makes me chuckles every time I read it, where at a certain point, the people had disobeyed so many times that God was like, you know what? I'm not going to help you this time. You ask your gods to do this because I'm sick and tired of helping you. And then you just keep doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And then the people are like, no, 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 God, we're going to come back to you. And God literally rescued them because he got like annoyed at them.
It's like the mom that says, "Okay,
Yeah,
you know what? I shouldn't do this because I've told you a million times, but here once
yeah,
again, let's swoop in and save
yeah.
the day." Oh
Yes,
gosh,
yes.
it's so
It's
beautiful.
so funny. And it kind of just opened up my eyes to like God just being a good father that, just loves his people so much. And so that's kind of how my podcast started, which is P40 Ministries. And of course, Alan was a guest and he helped me with a chapter in Exodus. And, right now the book is, or I'm sorry, the podcast is going through the book of Leviticus and also the book of Mark, and we're moving into Luke very soon. So it was kind of me having that passion for that like dramatized version that I had read with how it changed my aspect and my mindset so much that I wanted to also do something similar to that, which is why I started the P40 Ministries podcast. And by the way, P40 stands for Psalm 40, verses 1 and 2, which specifically says, "He brought me up out of the mud and mire, set my feet on solid ground, and steadied me as I walk along." And those are my life verses because that's exactly what God did for me. So
Wow.
yeah, so
And I've
so
always
that's
wanted to
what.
ask that. I'm glad you put the T. That was I should have been with the very first question. I've been wondering from the beginning. If I probably should have read your show notes, I would have known. But yeah, like what was P40? Where did it come from exactly? What? So thank you so much for clarifying that, so people can find that podcast. It's definitely in the show notes of this description right now. If you look in your podcast app, we'll make it clickable so you can get to it right away. But yeah, I wanted to back up a little bit just to the part between you starting to get fall in love with the Bible through this dramatization, which I think you kind of mentioned it very shortly, in a very short part. I think I want to dive more into the fact that you are a creative, that you have, created coloring books, so you're an artist clearly. That's kind of like that's a visual art, and then you're a musician. So can you talk about maybe the creative side of how did that I guess, how the Bible came alive to you? Did it also have an effect on your creative life? Because now you have written books and you've done devotional, and coach podcasting is creative where you have to handle a bunch of different things. So, what did that reignition of your faith in the Bible do for your creative life?
Oh my gosh, it changed it in every aspect. I used to I used to blog for, this is so embarrassing now, but I used to
Well, we
be an
said we're going to
organist.
let it go. So,
Yeah.
God knows it all. We're going to let everybody else know it all. So, don't worry. No judgment here. It's a no judgment zone on the God and Geek show.
Yeah, I used to be like an organizational blogger. Okay.
Oh, I thought it was going to be
And
something. Oh, oh my gosh. I
no,
was looking for something juicy. I was like waiting for oh my gosh, she was there? That was her on that.
yeah, well, I blogged for a while. I don't even remember my old blog name. But yeah, I used to do all stuff with like organization. But like looking back on it now, I guess it's embarrassing because it was just kind of silly. Like, and I'm not saying organization is silly. That is absolutely an aspect that people need in their lives. But it's just funny. I am the least organized person in the world. And I'm trying to be like this like know-it-all organizational like expert, okay, like Marie Kondo or something like that, and I'm not
Look,
at all. So
hey, look, next week I have to present at my church. Just so you know, I was asked to present a time management study based on some of the stuff the Jordan Rayner book that I read and had him on my show. So I told my pastor. My pastor was like, "Oh, you're teaching it," and I'm thinking to him, "Do you know who you just asked to teach on time management?" The person that is literally like staying up 3 o'clock in the morning to try to finish the projects that you just gave me. So trust, God always picks the unqualified, even for things like that. Even
yes.
jobs like that when you don't realize. So that's awesome that you were doing that. But yeah, clearly it gave you kind of like an inside track on. So you were creating content, you were doing things, weekly and monthly, and creating stuff, for another organization and a blog stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
now, you start to be able to do it for yourself. And again, a podcast, I got to reiterate this for those of you who don't know about P40 Ministries. She's going through the Bible daily. It's a daily podcast, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So that means every day, Monday through Friday, you're coming out with an episode. So talk about time management and commitment. I
Mm.
mean, you have really gone the extra mile. So tell me, like, yeah, just the commitment that takes to number one, be studying the Bible every day. And number two, create something to share it every day. Like, how are you doing that? How is that? How are you keeping that going? What's the fire or what's the process that's keeping you daily reading the Bible and daily sharing it?
Oh, it's been tough with Leviticus, I'll be honest.
Mm.
I've been struggling through Leviticus, and a lot of times I feel almost like I'm not, I wouldn't say worthy, but like I'm not like I don't have a degree in theology, like nothing like that. And so sometimes I look at this stuff and I'm like, man, I know God is blessing the project that I'm doing um and everything, but it's hard to like look at the Bible sometimes and to teach it to other people. But honestly, for me, it's just devoting my time to prayer. And I've been learning that a lot recently is that, yes, even though I have like a daily podcast and I'd love for people to tune in daily, I know people like me who is so sporadic is not going to listen to my podcast daily. So for people, like that, I just recommend being creative with your time with God. And I've been learning for me personally that has been extremely helpful is not doing the same thing every single day. Like, yes, tune into the podcast, tune into Alan's podcast, tune into my podcast when you want. And then maybe on a different day, like just spend some time in prayer or listen to worship music. Like that's what I did this morning. I instead of doing like a daily reading, I just worshiped God through music. And so I think it's important to you know like I'm not saying that structure is not important. I'm not trying to like say that,
No, I hear you.
but
Yeah.
keeping things interesting for personalities like myself, I guess, uh, you know, not always doing the same thing constantly, I guess, is something that's been helpful to me. But yeah. I, I
No,
don't know
I
how.
love that answer. That actually is very freeing. Number one for creatives, because like you said, many of us have this kind of like polymath. We love different things. One day it might be a worship song, the next minute it might be a dramatization or a movie, and the next day
Hmm.
God might kind of use the trees outside and you're just outside, or maybe you're in the snow or wherever. But God speaks in different ways, right? And He's ultimately the ultimate creative, right? I
Hmm.
mean, there's nothing
Hmm.
that's made that was not made by Him. And so everything that we're literally looking at, standing on the words, very, literally the words that we're standing on, or the thing we're standing on is the word of God. God spoke a word, it created the ground, we're standing on the ground. So we're literally
Hmm.
standing in creation and walking in creation all the time. So I feel like the fact that you just said it's okay not to think that it has to, God has to speak the same way to you and you have to follow the same routine to speak to Him. Like that's a
Hmm.
huge thing because I think some people do shy away from daily Bible reading because they think that way. They think like, oh,
Hmm.
the only way I can get to God is by opening to chapter one and read chapter one,
Yes.
two, three, four, verses two, three, four, five, close it, write a description of whatever. You know, there's so many different Bible study references. Actually, I remember one of your episodes, you had one of somebody who did a really good, I forgot what it was. It's oh gosh, it was a particular way of studying the Bible. I can't remember what it was, but you have to, I'll go back on Jen's podcast and you'll find it. But you know, it was really just a description of okay, you can do this, then this, then this. But that was not the only way to do it. You can follow so many other different. There's YouVersion, there's Olive Tree, and there's all these different ways to study the Bible. But the key is what works for you. I think would that be the best
Hmm.
way to put it? So it's not about
Yeah.
following kind of ritual. Even Jesus says that. He's like people
Hmm.
make these long prayers and they think they'll be heard for their much speaking because the scribes and
Hmm.
the Pharisees were coming with this regimented. This is the way we do it. It's the way we always do it. Versus where's your heart? How are you really
Hmm.
approaching God? And are you doing it for the right reasons? Or, like you said back when your early church days, are you just trying to check off a box? It's so important to
Right.
realize that. So, I think that was an awesome answer.
Thank you. And going back to what I said about prayer is I'm really learning about that recently of how important a prayer life really is. And I think that's something that Christians kind of shy away from a little bit, almost as if
Mhm.
like God already knows what we need. We don't have to pray about it. But I have been just learning how much God wants us to talk with him. And even recently I learned the power of prayer and I've been learning it. But when we had this horrific snowstorm. We don't have a plow guy, and I couldn't find a plow guy anywhere. My husband was stuck
Oh,
an
there's
hour
that word again.
away.
It's just stuck.
Stuck, yeah.
Oh gosh,
my
you can't
husband,
get away.
my husband was stuck an hour away, couldn't get home. And even if he wanted to get home, he couldn't get into our driveway. There's no way. We have a 900-foot driveway. And so I couldn't find a plow guy anywhere. 2 days trying to find a plow guy so my husband can get home. And I didn't pray about it at all. Finally, I'm going outside to try to like shovel part of like the end of my driveway so that my husband can just come in and walk up to the house with me. And the snow was as high as me because the plow for the road just like piled it all up into my driveway. And so I'm like, I can't do this. So finally I'm like, why aren't I praying about this? Guess what? An hour later, we found a snowplow guy. It was done 2 hours later after I prayed about it.
Yeah, so that's
And
such a great thing. There's nothing too little or too big, right? And one of the things I actually thought about this because we're actually doing a study at our church on faith. That our whole month, or sorry, our whole year. You talk about doing the Bible, consistently every day for your podcast. We're doing faith straight through the year 2022. And that's all the messages. Everything is going to be about faith. And so one of the things I thought about was, we talk a lot about, well, is faith speaking it, name it and claim it, and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes that we take that the wrong direction when it comes to prayer, even as you mentioned, thinking that
mhm,
God has to answer this way, and if I say it and God doesn't answer, that means He's not real or He didn't answer my prayer.
mhm,
Versus what I was thinking was God simply wants you to participate in the miracles. He could do it, right? He could have just snapped his fingers and a snowplow appears two
yeah,
weeks ago. But you wouldn't know who to thank, how you were a responsible party in the fact that God was ready to act, and He simply wanted you to be a part of it. Like He did not want
mhm,
you to not be a part of the solution. And I think that's such a
yes,
beautiful thing about prayer is that, like you said, God knows what we ask, what we're going to ask before we ask it. But it's like, no, I want you to be a part of this. I don't want you to,
mhm,
especially again, we're talking to us creatives. Same thing. It would be pretty kind of boring if I was just writing music in my living room and never shared it with anybody. As well, it's a beautiful song. I wrote it. It's nice. God heard it. But what's the good unless it's out there in the world to touch somebody or to share with somebody? And I think God's the same way. God's like, look, I can answer all these prayers in heaven right now, but I'm not
mhm,
going to. I'm not going to keep it to myself. I'm going to let you participate in the miracles,
mhm.
participate in the daily, like you said, the little things are the big things. And I think that's why I love your podcast and your devotion to it because it really puts that in perspective. The priority is, even if it's not perfect, you show up and God hears you and God actually responds.
Yes. And yeah, God truly is amazing. I believe that. And like I said before, just wants us to have that prayer life with him. And I've been discovering the importance of that. And, I just recommend that if you're not comfortable praying, just like, you don't have to make these long prayers. Just like make a list of some things you're thankful for and just say, God, thank you for this, this, and this. Like start out small.
Yeah.
And yeah, I agree that like you said, there is freedom in, not thinking that it has to be done a certain way every single time. But yeah.
So let me ask you, your daily devotional, you just mentioned that you woke up, with worship songs this morning, even that you change it up a little bit. What are some other ways that you kind of incorporate your devotional life throughout the day? Like you just mentioned, even with the snowplow, but maybe is it, an evening routine that helps you get ready for the morning? Is there, other kinds of things? I'm thinking about the busy creative right now. Like what kind of other things do you find help you to remember moments like you just mentioned prayer? What helps you throughout the day to keep that prayer and the things you study top of mind when days get busy?
Hmm. Well, I mean, going back to the prayer thing, like there's a verse in the Bible that just says constantly pray.
Yeah.
It literally says just constantly pray. And like I said, you don't have to constantly pray if you're not used to that yet. But I mean, I don't know. And keeping worship music on, that's a big one for me. I love music. I'm also a musician like Alan is. And Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have a good answer to that question, if I'm being 100% honest with you.
No, that's great. No, I love the fact that you're actually saying, okay, look, this is something we're working out each day. And
Yeah.
the reason I asked is because I think, as we mentioned even before we turned on the recording, we're both in church musician staffs, you know what I mean? So we work on this stuff daily or weekly. And it can seem, people might look at us and say, oh, well, you got it all together. Well, of course, you know what Bible scripture to read. Of course, you know. And of course, you know what worship song to sing. And your admission that, hey, it doesn't always feel like, it's not like snapping our fingers and we know exactly what to say, what to pray. Oh, yeah, scripture here, scripture there. Like, that's not, even for someone like you that's going through the Bible cover to cover, it's not as easy and not simple, but it is, I think, all about the repetition. It's all about saying, okay, God, I love the Bible verse that says in Isaiah, come, let us reason together. Because
Hmm.
to me, that shows that God's okay with us figuring stuff out. Same thing with Job, just question after question after question after question. And he's like, yeah, I can handle questions. I can handle not being
Hmm.
sure. Even doubt
Hmm.
to a certain extent, God is okay with, right? He's not okay with doubting him, but he was even okay with Thomas doubting and said, hey, okay, I'm going to show you this. Now, blessed are those who don't see and believe. But I think
Hmm.
God is okay with the question marks we have even throughout the day. So, I loved it.
Yeah.
And don't worry, I wasn't trying to pin you to the board or anything like that with that answer. I love the fact that, and I do want to come back to one quick thing before we move ahead. You did say, even when in terms of you're explaining the Bible, one of the things I love about your podcast is that you're not trying to teach like a seminarian. You're not
Mhm.
saying, oh, here's what my preacher said, and here's the thing from St. Augustine or whatever. So let's just continue to lower that worry for people that are approaching the Bible that may feel like, oh, I got to have this much Greek and Latin, or sorry, Greek and Hebrew in my mind
Mhm.
to be able to read it. You're saying that it's really something that you can approach just from where you are, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's what my the premise of the podcast is relatability in the modern day. Because, like for example, the podcast episode I had you on, we talked about Bezalel. I don't know if I'm saying it right to
Yeah,
this
we're
day,
still good.
but
If you go back to the episode, guys, you'll hear how we both, or for all, again, we literally said it. We're going to say it again. For
yeah.
all the scholars, we are not the scholars. Okay,
Yeah,
go get the
yeah.
Strong's Concordance, get your Blue Letter Bible, and let it play it for you. We are simply talking about the study and trying to learn what the Bible says, not necessarily getting everything 100% right when it comes to
Right.
pronunciations and stuff.
Yeah. So, even that episode though, I try to bring people in, and I don't always have guests, but I try to bring people in that can relate, because Bezalel was a person who, helped build the original tent of meeting, the temple, and he was a creative. So I'm like, I want to find a man that could relate to that. And so that's where Alan Paul came in. And yeah, he helped me out with that episode. But just relatability in the modern day, because people think of the Bible as an old book. It doesn't mean anything nowadays, but it literally says in the Bible that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever.
Absolutely.
So there is absolutely relatable content in the Bible that translates into the modern day, even in the Old Testament, even in the law. I'm seeing so much stuff going through the Levitical law that relates so heavily with where we are at today. And so, yes, I do think that looking at the Bible in those eyes, in the eyes that God is good, the Bible is relatable to the modern day, can really change your mindset on the Bible. And that's kind of what I wanted to do with the P40 Ministries podcast.
Well, I love, again, everything about this speaks to kind of what God and Gigs is about when it comes to bringing the everyday life and the scripture and the spiritual part of us and uniting it instead of this, like, well, here's your spiritual life and here's your real life, and you go to church and you live like this and you think like
Mm-hmm.
this, and then you go to your regular job or creative life or your gig or whatever, and then you think like this. It kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
almost, to kind of turn back a little bit, when you were talking about those other jobs that you didn't like, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like, I have to be here, I have to
Mm-hmm.
shut this part off, this is not going to be enjoyable. Versus when you're integrated and you have the word and you have prayer and you are using it daily and you realize God's walking with you in every single thing, not just the big things or the little things or the Sunday things. All of a sudden, it's like life starts to fall into place, because he says it's like, if you lose your life, in other words, if you don't focus on what's wrong, you
Mm-hmm.
gain, and you gain so much more when you find it in him. we
Right.
find our lives in Him. And so it's such a beautiful thing. I want to ask
Hmm.
one more question because I do like to kind of turn this always around to what you've learned over the past, 10, 20 years, as whatever the journey is, and think about that person who is where you were. So to the person who is, trying to figure out their job, and maybe again, like you said, they're kind of halfway in, halfway out of the church, kind of closed off. What would you say to the person who is where you were that would help them kind of like realize that there is a path out, especially through their faith?
I always refer people back to trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not into your own understanding. All your ways acknowledge him, he will make your path straight. It's really funny because 2018, that was my life verse because I had been convicted with whatever my church's like New Year's
Then you
sermon
seem,
thing was. Yeah.
yeah,
And so they were like, you should make this your New Year's theme. And I'm like, all right, fine, I'll try to do that. And maybe that was actually kind of the start of where I'm at today. Because when I decided to apply that verse, even though I truly did not apply it very well. I was kind of like, oh, well, we'll see. But that verse, in all your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your paths. That includes your career. That includes everything in your life. That includes marriage, children, everything. And so that is kind of where I tell people if you're not quite sure where you're going with your lives, put God first, like or acknowledge God. Acknowledge him with what you're doing and he will make your path straight. And honestly, that is my story. That is my story from start to finish. Like when I started acknowledging God and not just like checking off a little box here and there, I was he directed my paths into what I'm doing right now. So that is my advice to anybody stuck where I used to be stuck is just acknowledge God.
wow, just beautiful. And your theme, what that was your, like you said, you started to make it your theme verse. My theme verse, if I had to pick one, is Psalms 25:10, which is all the paths of the Lord are full of mercy and truth. And I
Mm-hmm.
love that verse A clause because, just like you said, paths includes
Mm-hmm.
so many other things that we don't think. God sees all the paths, plural, and is still bringing you to mercy and truth. And that is really the same point that we're making to all of our listeners now is that whatever place you find that you think you're stuck, you're still on the path. And that's why the Bible talks about, like letting that light be a light into your path, and a lamp unto your, a lamp unto your feet and a
Mm-hmm.
light into your pathway, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I love this. So tell people now, you have done way more than just a podcast. So can you let them know how to find you and also some of the other materials and the other, works and devotional materials you've made available because, you've done so much now that you've walked into this new path of creating. I'd love for them to follow you and also to take advantage of your resources. So how can they find them?
Oh, sure. So my website is www.p40ministries.com, and you can find pretty much everything that I do there. But one thing I try to do is meet a person where they're at with their devotional life. I know that the podcast is not for everybody. People who like structure, like my husband, are going to listen in every single day. People who are like me might listen in every once in a while. But I have the coloring book devotionals that I actually both illustrated and authored, and those are for actually a mother and a child to do together. So there's a adult
Oh,
one and there's a child one, and they have similar pictures in them, but the child one is obviously easier, and it is for parents and children to actually sit down, read a devotional together, color together, and the parents can teach the children, a little bit about that devotional. And so I have those available for parents. And then I have the Out of the Mire devotional, which is also based on Psalm 40. And that is about Joseph's life story. Joseph in the Old Testament, the slave who, went through a terrible career.
yeah, exactly. Not exactly
Terrible.
same thing. Like a lot of stops and starts there that were not very
Yes.
pleasant.
Yes. He was a slave and he became the second in command of all of Egypt in the ancient days. So that I have that for people who are where I was, struggling with career, struggling with purposelessness. There's that devotional. And so, yeah, you can find all that stuff on p40ministries.com. And yeah.
Well, Jen, this is again awesome. I do feel this sense of real just comfort, and you just talked about the relatability. You have it in spades. Like there's no pretense, there's no worry or judgment in terms of, oh well, I'm doing a podcast that does the whole Bible. What are you doing? It's like, you know what I mean? I feel that sometimes when I look at other people's podcasts and I say, oh my gosh, they are so far ahead of me, and they're so much more pious than I am, and I get you have to totally, I believe, in this podcast too, shared your heart of how it doesn't always look perfect, doesn't look beautiful, but he has made all things beautiful in his time, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
whatever place you're in,
Yes.
listener, wherever you are, just start where you are, pick up the word, pick up a podcast like Jen's or a devotional, and start from where you are, and God will meet you there. And that's really the message
Mm-hmm.
that we would love to leave with you. Jen, this has been amazing. I know we're going to keep doing this, but until the next time, thank you so much. God bless you, and we'll definitely be in touch.
Thanks. Bye.